Wait here. Well, thank you all for coming back again very much to round two. And thank you to Dee for her plug this morning on the high places. We talked a lot about high places last week, and oh, I know what I'm missing here. Oh, here we go. This is a rough cross section, if you can see it. I'm afraid it's a little low. If we were to take a slice through the area that we're calling the Holy Land, and this is the MRI, if you will. Over here is the high plain on the east where Amman, Jordan is, or Philadelphia in Jesus' time, and then the hills, and then coming way down into what we call the Great Rift Valley here, with the Dead Sea at the bottom. This is the Dead Sea. And the Jericho Plain coming across, the Jordan River here, and then up into hills to the top of the hill country on the west bank of the Jordan, where Jerusalem and Bethlehem are located, and then the long, gradual sloping plain, the Shephelah, coming down, and then the plain of Sharon, which is a very fertile area, and this is the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea here, to give it a sense of the up and downs. And just wanted to go back to that, and the wonderful prophecies from Isaiah about the high places and the wadis we saw last time. When the people are going to return from Bethlehem, the low places are going to be lifted up, and the high places are going to be brought down, and it's going to be a smooth highway for the people coming back from Babylon to Jerusalem, and it's going to be so easy, not even a fool could get lost. Although anybody could get lost the way it is right now, as we saw last week. We're going to leave the desert behind. Oh, the last thing to say about the hills and the valley, that's where two tectonic plates meet. We talked about earthquakes. Earthquakes are very common in the Holy Land, and those two tectonic plates actually are moving slowly apart. So the Jordan Valley, imperceptible to us, is actually getting a little bit wider as the eons go on. And that's what causes the earthquakes, such as the one that Turkey and northern Syria experienced these past couple of weeks. Many times there's been just wholesale destruction of cities. Pika? How is the Dead Sea formed? Does it have a chance of getting out? No. It doesn't have a chance of getting out. Interesting you ask, because the Jordan River we'll see next week. We're going to go way up to the far north and to the springs of the Jordan River where it originates. And because of this rift in the valley, it just simply flows southward through the rift in the valley, and it gets to the end of the Dead Sea, and there's no escape. But what's happening is the Dead Sea actually is drying up, because so much water is being taken out by Israel and Jordan for irrigation that oops, somehow this turned off. I'm not sure how. Do we have a plug that's out over here somewhere? We lost power. I think. Maybe it's my. Oh, maybe it's my machine. Technical failures. What do you think? We'll try this other plug here. Well, Pika, to go ahead and to answer your question, the Dead Sea is actually drying up. There have been luxury hotels have been built on the Dead Sea for people to get the bromides and everything from the water, and now you have to kind of go like a mile to get to the water in some places. There's been a proposal. Well, thank you. Great. There's been a proposal to put in a pipe from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea and let it replenish itself. But that's probably not going to go anywhere. Yeah. No, that's why it's dead. It just has nowhere to go. Yeah.
What purpose does it serve?
Oh, lots of purposes. I could preach about that, you know, but it's just there. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Are there what? Plains? Yeah, two cities down at the bottom, Sodom and Gomorrah. So again, just to reflect, here we are at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, and Cyprus and Crete and Greece and Asia Minor, and this little strip of land right down here. You can see right here up from Damascus down here, here's the Rift Valley, and the Arabah, and it goes into the Red Sea, and it goes all the way down that rift, that tectonic rift goes all the way down to Mozambique in Africa. It splits up through Egypt. We did the deserts last week, and we're going to leave that exotic land and come to the top of the hill country, and then out to the coast, and then up to the hill country in the north. So where we're going to go today another technical difficulty here. There we go. We're going to leave the Rift Valley. We're going to start up on the hills of Judea, down through here. We're going to come out to the coast, going to come up the coast, come into the hill country of Samaria, and end up in the great plain of Jezreel up here. So we're going to come right like this today. Okay. A few things about the land. There's absolutely nothing that's of particular value in that strip of land. There are no navigable rivers. There are no great metallic mining resources. There's a lack of water almost everywhere. There are no huge urban centers, so that when the tribes came up from the desert and crossed over the Jordan and came into the land, there were lots of little warring clans of people, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, all those kinds of people, and Canaanites and Philistines and Phoenicians. And so the tribes of Israel, in dividing up the land, just got into the mix and had continual war. This has been a source, a site of continual warfare, because when the Egyptians wanted to control trade, they would conquer this area. When the Assyrians wanted to control trade, they conquered this area. When the Babylonians wanted to control trade, they conquered this area. When the tribes up here wanted to control trade, and when the Greeks, the Seleucids, wanted to come down and control trade, and when the Romans, finally way off to the left, wanted to take over, this land has always known war. It has very rarely ever known peace. And so there's never been a great flourishing of an indigenous culture in the Holy Land. because it's just been subjected to wave after wave after wave after wave of conquest. It's a very strange little strip of land. But it contains so much, it's unreal. Okay, let's move on. We're going to come south from Jerusalem on top of the mountain ridge in Judea, and on the way toward Bethlehem, we're going to pass Rachel's tomb, where she's buried. She was not buried with the other patriarchs and their wives. She was buried separately for some reason, apparently. And we're going to come to Bethlehem, which is only 5 miles south of Jerusalem. It's a morning's walk from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. Very, 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 very close by. It was the city where David was born and where his family lived and raised sheep. And you can see at the top of the hills, as we saw last week, off to the east is the desert. Real cutoff of rainfall. On the west side, fertile. On the east side, absolute desert across the top of this mountain ridge. Inside the city of Bethlehem, today it's mostly a Christian city, although there is a major mosque there, and today it's also walled off. I want to say you won't see many photographs of people in these slides because we were very clearly told not to photograph a lot of people. This is their home. It's not a theme park. And also, but I do want to make the point, there are vibrant city centers and cultures and so forth in the Holy Land today. But mostly what I'm showing for these first 4 weeks, not much of indigenous people at all. Those are charutes, the extended taxis that take you, you share rides and go all up and down. Manger Square in Bethlehem. The Church of the Nativity is right there. It's built in around the 400s and has been built out since then, and lots of other buildings around it. The entrance to the door to the Church of the Nativity is blocked in with just a little tiny entrance there, and you have to bend way over to get into the church. It's called the Door of Humility. That's for us Christians. But it also was a place of refuge for people when tribes would attack. And so that people couldn't ride their horses into the church. And if they came through the church, you could be on the other side with a sword and lop their heads off and things like that. So it was for defense. The inside of the church, it's an Orthodox church. There's a Latin church next to it. Of course, you know, they don't get along, so they have separate places. Beautiful church. Still maintaining a lot of the interior from the Crusader times, like mosaic walls, and it was brightly painted. The columns were brightly painted originally. And the little section of floor right here has been pulled up. And unfortunately, you can't see it here, but it's a mosaic floor probably from the 400s. There it is. Yeah, you know, use your imagination. Behind, up above, in the front of the church, underneath the raised altar area, are the entrances to go down below to the place where it is said that Jesus was born. What I'm going to do a little bit this morning is kind of knock apart a lot of our Jesus stories. I hope you don't mind, but you know, bear with me on this. So to go down the steps into the area below, a shrine in the cave below. It's actually a cave below the church. And this is revered as the place where Jesus was born. Many people lived in caves or built houses on the front of caves. And so the fact that it's a cave is very realistic and real. It doesn't look like it there, but real probable. So that our little creche scenes, you know, with the little wooden buildings, all that kind of stuff, that's European. That is not Middle Eastern. Wood was far too precious to use to build stables. So caves often in the bottom floor of houses or underneath houses where animals were kept. That's revered as the place where Jesus was born, and alongside it is a place where the manger supposedly was. Now the other thing with the manger, it was not a wooden manger. It was a carved stone manger. Again, wood was far too precious to use for something that sheep were going to gnaw on. And there are many mangers and water troughs and feeding troughs and so forth around in different parts of the Holy Land. So think cave, think of stone, and so forth. Few words just about our stories. In Matthew, If we read the Gospel of Matthew by itself, Jesus and Mary and Joseph lived in Bethlehem. That was their home. There's nothing in the Gospel of Matthew about Nazareth and the Annunciation, anything like that. It opens up with the family in Bethlehem. And the Magi come, and the clues inside the Gospel is the Magi might have come as long as 2 years after Jesus was born. Because when Herod the king heard from them, he ordered all the male children 2 years old and younger to be slaughtered. So think of Jesus as a toddler when the Magi come. Yeah. How many Magi were there? Bible doesn't say. There are 3 kinds of gifts that were offered. I sometimes think there were 15, whatever. But the Bible does not say how many Magi there were or exactly where they came from. But they do say that they went to the house where Jesus was, not to the stable, not to the cave, but to the house. Now, Luke's gospel, and also Herod, who ordered the slaying of the innocents, perfectly consistent with his temperament, particularly in his last year or 2 or 4, perfectly, he died 4 BC. So if we accept the Matthew story, Jesus was born 4 to 6 BC. A lot of people think 6 BC. Luke's gospel starts in Nazareth with an annunciation there and has Mary coming south toward Bethlehem to stay with her cousin Elizabeth. The traditional village for Elizabeth is Ein Kerem, which is right in a hollow right near Bethlehem. Beautiful, beautiful Arab village, now completely in Israeli Jewish hands. But and so she came and stayed there 3 months. Nazareth is what, 70, 80 miles from Jerusalem. A pregnant woman would be coming that far? I'm not sure. The argument is that if indeed Mary and Elizabeth were cousins of some sort, that they would be from the same geographical area. So again, not quite sure about that. The business about coming to Bethlehem because Quirinius had ordered a tax. Well, Quirinius's tax wasn't until 8 AD. So it's 14 years later than the time in Matthew. And what Quirinius was taxing was property. It wasn't people. So it wasn't a census. It was a property tax that he ordered. So again, there's some question about that. At any rate, the 2 stories are quite different in timing, location, and so forth, but they both agree that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and that eventually the family went to Nazareth. And the story about that in Matthew, I think, is historically probably more accurate. Because after Herod died, his son Archelaus took over the kingship, and Archelaus was more brutal than Herod. And so Joseph and Mary and the baby certainly would have gone south into the desert toward Egypt or whatever to avoid being in his governing area, and would have gone around and up to Nazareth where his brother Herod Antipas was actually in charge. And so all that, Matthew makes much more sense to me. Do with that what you want, though. Okay, this is a view out of Bethlehem that is shown to pilgrims as the shepherd's field. That's nice. Yes? They were living in Bethlehem. Herod, according to Matthew, ordered that all the infant children should be slaughtered. So the angel came to Joseph in a dream. Interesting. Matthew is Joseph's story. Luke is supposedly Mary's story. But and to get out because he's looking to kill your son. And so they went south to get away from Herod, right, from Bethlehem, from their home. They went south. And then Herod died shortly after, a year, whatever, maybe after that occasion. But his son Archelaus took over the throne in Jerusalem. And so he was worse. And to avoid him they went around, probably up through Jordan, what we know as Jordan, and up to Galilee, where Herod Antipas, Archelaus' brother, had a kingdom. Because Herod's kingdom got split up between three sons. So the three sons who survived his murdering, right? So, yeah. So we're going to leave Bethlehem now and go down this hill toward the coast. We're going to go on the road to Emmaus. Now, when you go to Israel, you have a choice of 3 Emmauses that you might want to visit. I've only chosen 2 to show. This is one church of Emmaus, and then the gardens around it. You see the lush, beautiful areas and the difference it is from the desert. And this is the second church. This is the Crusader Church of Emmaus in the village of Abu Ghosh. This is the one I choose. And the third one is at Latrun. So all 3 have people who adhere to them and so forth. But the road to Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem, where the disciples were going on the day of the resurrection, and Jesus joined them and went to their house, and he took over at supper, remember? And all that kind of thing. So Emmaus is on the road from the hilltop of Jerusalem down toward the sea. We're coming down now to the Shephelah, which is the large plain area before we get to the coast. And this was Philistine country. And for hundreds of years, the Israelites and the Philistines fought each other constantly. When the Israelite tribes came into the Promised Land, it was really lovely and everything, except there were a lot of people living there already. They had to deal with the Canaanites, who were especially in the hill country. The Phoenicians were north on the coast, and the Philistines were on the southern coast. And they had 5 major cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. We know Gaza, we know Ashkelon, we know Ashdod. We're not quite sure where the other 2 cities were. But the tribes came in and they divided up the land from the far north down to the far south among the 12 tribes. 11 tribes got territory. The tribe of Levi didn't get any territory because that was the priestly tribe. And so they lived kind of doing priestly things among all the different areas. The other thing is that when the tribes came in, they came in essentially as Stone Age, Bronze Age tribes into a land where the Philistines particularly were into the Iron Age. So they faced far more powerful enemy than they had capability of dealing with. And they suffered all sorts of things. There's a great story in the north of the Canaanites from Hatzor coming down and taking over land and so forth. And Deborah, I want to mention Deborah especially because you don't hear a lot of women judges kind of leading the people. But she led a special raid, and Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite Hatzorites, fled the army, and he came to a tent. Do you know the story about this? And so the Canaanites said, "Oh yes, you can rest here." And while he was resting, the wife of the Kenite took a stake and a hammer and drove it through his skull. So when the Israelites and Deborah came, he was already dead. Anyway, so they were fighting up in the north. Samson and Delilah, again, a story of Samson from the hill country, Delilah from the Philistines. And Samson couldn't stay away from Philistine women. Read the story. And he always got in trouble. And it's gruesome reading. I have scripture quotations for all these citations. But Samson went down to Delilah, and the Philistines encouraged her because he was so in love with her. He was just blind. Well, he ended up being blind, as you know. But that was another story of the conflict. And the final story is of David and Goliath. David is from the hill country up in Bethlehem. Goliath is a Philistine from down along this Shephelah, along this plain. And Goliath is done in armor, in bronze armor, with an iron sword. And what's David got? A slingshot. He's got stones. Again, you see the difference in the cultures. between the two different groups, and we know how that one comes out. So we've come down here toward this area where all these battles and fighting took place. This is at Tel Gezer, G-E-Z-E-R, which has standing stones. Interesting, you think of England, Scotland, and Wales, but here they are in Israel. All this Tel is unexcavated that you see behind. And we're looking down now on a gateway into Gezer from the Iron Age of Solomon. This is a 6-part entrance gateway into the city where, again, anybody coming through the gateway, people could hide in recesses and get them as they came in. So this was one of the first excavations in Gezer. The authorities let them grow over so that they don't get disturbed and people don't want to, whatever. We come down finally to the coast, and you can see we're right about here now. We've come down from Jerusalem right here to the coast. You see another problem with the Holy Land, not only with resources and rivers and water and all those kinds of things, there is no deep water harbor along the coast of Israel, Palestine, anywhere. The best one is way up north near Ptolemais, what's now Haifa today. So it's all along here. We're in the ancient city of Joppa. This photograph is taken looking north to Tel Aviv, which is just north of Joppa. Joppa is where Jonah went and got on a boat to get away. Fateful journey. And also, it's the place where Peter went when he came down from Jerusalem and spent some time. So the coastline is no harbors, all just there, and most of it is sand. It's sand that actually is blown up from Africa. So out of the deserts of Africa, from Egypt, so the sand comes up along the winds along the Mediterranean and just produce sand dune after sand dune after sand dune. You can see why Israel never had a navy. Never read about ships of David or Solomon, all inland and so forth. Also because of the Philistines. Well, we're coming into the sand dunes. We're going north to a city that you might have heard of, but you should know better, and I hope you will after today. It's called Caesarea. How many people have heard of Caesarea Maritima? Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, you're going to hear a lot about this from me because I spent a month there in excavations. I'm going to share some of it with you. Caesarea was sand dunes like this. These sand dunes now cover actually part of Caesarea. Anywhere you look, you can find pottery and evidences of former civilizations. I want to take a minute to explain about excavations, and we'll get into this some more. City excavations, like at Caesarea, are the worst because what happens when a city is conquered or destroyed, often it is burned or it is crushed, and cities build upon cities. The best sources for pottery and other evidence of ancient culture is in tombs, because in tombs the pottery can be pushed back as new bodies are put in there and it might be broken, but all the pieces are together. Here, this is stuff, you can't tell anything from this stuff. It's what's called a mixed site. But in tombs, you can get some real good stuff. I spent a week with an American in the basement of St. George's School in Jerusalem, putting together pottery from tombs in the Samaritan Hills. And it was wonderful. It clicked right together, you glue it right together, you could reconstruct what it was originally. This stuff, I've got a lot of it over on the table if you want to pick up some of it later. Walking across the sand dunes, there's evidence of the city that's not been uncovered. This is a Greek inscription on a floor with tesserae. On top, I think this is part of a human skull. The most recent residents there were people who had fled oppression and war in Europe and had come in the 1880s from a place, they were a group of people we had never heard of when I was there. They were called Bosnians. Yeah, we had never heard of them in the day of 82 when I was there. And they had come there as refugees and lived on top of the sand dunes and buried their dead about 8 inches in the sand and so forth. So in some areas at Caesarea, these bodies have to be excavated, exhumed, if you will, before digging can take place. Caesarea was a construction from nothing by that same good old King Herod. He built it from scratch beginning in 22 BCE and finished about 10 BCE, before the Common Era. And it about one and a half square miles. At the height of its population, it had a population of about 120,000 people. It was polyglot, so many languages were spoken there. Just a word about languages in the Holy Land, 4 languages particularly. There was Aramaic, which was the language of the streets, that Jesus and the disciples spoke and so forth. There was Hebrew, which at this point was relegated primarily to liturgical use, formal use like that. Common people didn't speak Hebrew so much. There was Greek. Greek culture, Greek language was everywhere. And when we think about Greek, it was really the second language. And then there was Latin, which was eventually the language of government, which again, many people like us wouldn't have anything much to do with. But think of Jesus and the disciples and the mixture of Greek and Aramaic names. Like Simon is an Aramaic name. Jesus changed his name to Petros, Peter, which is Greek for rock. Andrew, disciple, absolutely a Greek name. It means, if you pardon it, you do this, it means manly. Philip is a Greek name. Scythopolis was a city named for Greeks and so forth. So, but I think that Jesus knew and spoke Greek and Aramaic. We had a language professor with us on one of the trips, and he was very, very enlightening about this. Probably didn't have to know Latin, even though they say that what was put above the cross was in Latin, because it was a government document. Jesus Christ, the King of the Jews, in Latin. But Greek and Aramaic, probably. So think of Jesus as multilingual. The Crusader walls, which was the last big habitation of Caesarea, still stand. That's a moat. Moats don't have to have water. They're just as effective without water, because you get down in that thing and you just get spears and arrows slung at you all the time. So the moat that's been excavated, Roman archway along what might have been a street in Caesarea, the name, Caesarea, for Caesar, right. Herod sucked up to the Caesars like crazy. He chose the wrong side in the civil war between Octavian and Mark Antony, Cleopatra, all that kind of thing, and all involved up here. And he chose Mark Antony. And so when Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and they both died and all that kind of thing, Herod kind of pulled up his socks and went to Crete and met Octavian to submit to him, saying, I was on the wrong side, I'm ready for you to kill me. And Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, said, to himself, this guy could do a good job. He's done such a good job for so many years. So he made him king. And that's how Herod got to be king, because Caesar Augustus. So he built the city as a showcase of the Roman Empire, and named it for Caesar. And it's called Caesarea Maritima because it's on the sea, the Mara. It's on the sea. Because there are other Caesareas too. So that's where it got its name. It has no water because it's in the sand dunes. So the Roman legion, and Herod's people first, and the Roman legion after, they built an aqueduct that's 10 miles long that brought water from the Carmel Hills up in the north down into the city. And they did water. They had fountains in the streets, they had swimming pools, they had running water everywhere, they had lush gardens all through this aqueduct. And also in the city, they designed a sewer system so that there could be some fresh water brought in, but a sewer system was under the streets, so the tides would flush out the sewer system. The building of this place was absolutely incredible. He built a breakwater to form a harbor because there was none. So to build the breakwater, they perfected a kind of rough sense of how to pour concrete so underwater so it would harden underwater. And it was a technology that wasn't rediscovered for us until the middle of the 19th century. So they had divers that would go down with these things, and they'd fill up with the lime and the other kinds of stuff, and would great big huge, and they would lower them down and set them in place, and had divers with incredible lung capacity apparently who could do this. So he built a breakwater to form a harbor. That's a little bit what's left of it today. And at the end of it, there was a lighthouse. I don't know if you've read ever about the lighthouse in Alexandria. It's a huge tower with a fire kept burning all the time that could be seen, they said, 35 miles out to sea, to guide people into the place of Caesarea. This was an unbelievable city. Of course, the theater. Is it an amphitheater? No, it's a theater, right? It's a theater. Amphitheater is around both sides. This is a theater. It's been reconstructed, used for concerts and performances and so forth today. And in clearing out the area, they found the most amazing stone that is maybe a little hard to read, but the top line says ad Tiberium, which means for Tiberius, erected by Pontius Pilatus, Pontius Pilate, from the time when he was procurator. He was a very ineffective procurator, and he was removed finally. He was finally from the procuratorship, after Jesus' death and resurrection, and like others before him, including Archelaus in Jerusalem, was banished where everybody had to be banished to, which is Gaul, France. They all got sent there. Get them out, get them out, get them out. So anyway, that was a phenomenal find there. A lot of it has been sort of uncovered. There's a statue to the Roman god Asclepius, the god of healing, the snake, and the modern symbol of medicine with the snakes around the staff. And evidence of a Christian church that was built at a later time in Caesarea. In fact, Caesarea became one of the 5 really important bishoprics in the early Mediterranean church. Origen, a lot of other folks were there, Eusebius. The Romans later built a hippodrome, which is now a field, for racing chariots, Ben-Hur, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, at Caesarea, not been excavated. But the city is a jumble because stone was used and reused and so forth, different kinds of stone. This is probably original Herodian stone here. You can see some columns have been placed in just to kind of prop up where they needed it. This is probably Crusader stone, really, really ragged. Who knows what this is? So Caesarea itself is very much a mixed site. On the dig, volunteers came from mostly European-type countries, including the US and Australia and so forth. We lived in a sports center, an aquatic sports center, because it's on the ocean. This is a great place for surfboarding and things like that. The waves are not very big. So we gathered all there. We lived in these dormitories at the sports center. Quite a resort. Nice to be on the beach. And every morning we got up, we would be sleeping, and the door would open to the bunkhouse room each of us was in, and Boker Tov, good morning, screaming and yelling at 4:45. We got up at 4:45. We were on the site of the dig by 5:30. So we got up at 4:45, nobody showered. Any showering might have been done the day before. We got over, they had sugar cookies and sugar water. That was our energy to get us going in the beginning, piled on the buses, or walked up to the dig from Sadat Yam, the kibbutz. And we'd line up for the morning lecture for our This is the group of us who worked on the temple platform where Herod's great temple to Roma was originally and a Christian church was later. We were in TP Area 5. So this group, we worked together all summer in a particular area that was given us. So we're getting our instructions on the first day. You can see everybody is nice and clean and neat. First thing we had to do was line out and mark different areas for excavation so that the trenches would have a symmetry to them. And once the areas were lined out, then we had to brush the dirt off the top layer of stones. We had to do that 3 times. It was the dirtiest job I've ever been in the world. And so finally, when we got down to some stones, there we are brushing. We're all brushing. We all worked very closely together. We got to be able to tell each other, identify each other by different parts of our bodies really well. I'm sorry? I'm sorry, kid, I can't hear you. No. Sorry, no face masks, no. Then we began digging. The thing about archaeological digging is that it essentially destroys whatever it is that you're digging on. Because once you move a stone, it'll never go back to the same place again. So it's done very, very slowly and very, very carefully with constant drawings in pencil of surface maps. So we're just beginning to get some one layer of stone taken off. And you can see in the buckets, and the buckets had to be carried and emptied. There we are in our trench with our first layer of stones being raised. Now all those buckets were taken off to a sifter, and every bucket of dirt had to be sifted. Big benches with sifters on them on flexible metal legs, shake them back and forth, the sand goes, the dust goes through, the dirt goes through, and you pick out and pick out and pick out whatever you can from the debris. It was really great fun because we had tourists at the site all the time, and they would watch and look at them and say, "Would you like to give it a try?" It was horrible work. "Oh, could I?" They'd be shaken away, and it would be really nice. And a little bit of pottery, a little bit of glass or stuff like that. Take it as a souvenir, you know. So we began going down to the trench, and we got deeper and deeper, and different layers began to be uncovered. And the pottery that we picked out of the trench was carefully labeled and bagged every day, and came back at the end of the day to the sports center and was hung in mesh bags to dry. And we quit work at 12:15 every day. It got too hot. It was over 100 degrees. And so we'd come back, and the first day we came back, I have in my notes that we came back to the sports center. Most people took a shower, a couple of us didn't. The second day, we all came back, hardly anybody took a shower. You know, we were so dirty, we were going to stay dirty until later in the day, we knew it. So we'd spend afternoon with scrub brushes, scrubbing the pottery, washing it off, getting the dirt off, and all the kinds of so forth like that, and keeping it in the identified bags so it could be cataloged for the future. We had a dog who joined us. His name was Procopius, we called him that. I have no idea where he came from. He never barked, never did anything but sat there and watched us all day. So probably from the kibbutz. Anyway, the trenches got deeper and deeper, and this is called stratigraphy. You can see how as we dug down through the layers, there are different colors of layers, each one signifying maybe a different level of civilization. And the tags that are up here are identifying the different layers. And some of them are horizontal, some of them kind of go different ways. Some of them showed evidence of burning, of ash. So we go down through the different layers as we dug. Always looking at how high above sea level were we, at which layer, and so forth. Our tools were buckets or guffos, picks and hoes, which we didn't use very much, brushes, which we used frequently for sanding. Every one of us had to bring a Marshalltown trowel. It's the only kind we could bring. We drew site plans on graph paper, and this is a soil book, so that we would indicate what the exact color of the soil that we were finding was. This was our trench. We began to uncover something of an arch, and apparently a wall that runs across this way, and you can see the different layers are simply built on top of each other. Very, very typical. Opening up the arch, Christy's just coming back, emptying the uffaws and so forth. This is a professor from the University of Oklahoma who is working in our trench. And finally, we got to identifying a real arch. And after all this, the drawings and the photography and everything, we were allowed to lift the stones. Now, there are two kinds of sites. There's a sealed site, which is below which, if you find a coin, it dates the site. There's an unsealed site, which is undifferentiated. You can't tell anything. Well, we lifted these stones and began digging through the sand, and the first thing we found was a yogurt cup. It was the most disappointing thing in the world. And what the dig directors thought was that the Bosnians had filled in, this was actually a cistern under the church, under the temple, and had filled in the cistern to support it. Sometime probably in the 1940s or whatever, whatever. So anyway, we didn't find a whole lot in our trench, but we did find at the bottom a cook pot, a used cook pot, all by itself on bedrock. And what we were told was that when we build skyscrapers, we put a flag at the top, what the Hellenistic folks did, when they began to build a building, they would put a cook pot at the bottom as a sign of good luck for whatever's going to come on that site. And we found the cook pot. Kind of fun, yeah. Well, if you'd like to dig, there's lots to do. And I have a magazine over on the table, the recent issue of Biblical Archaeology Review, which lists all the sites that are accepting volunteers. This could not happen without volunteers. There, you can dig anywhere there. The city is just huge. Well, we're going to leave Caesarea and go up into the hill country of Samaria, which is north of Jerusalem. Lots of hills. Dee was talking about high points. I looked to the hills for when does my help come. I think that was a Canaanite prayer that got adapted by the Israelites for the Psalter and so forth. The hilltops, again, were places where the intermixing of heaven and earth took place. They were extremely important. And this is the city of Sebaste, which Herod built, and Sebaste was the Greek name for Augustus. So again, giving lavish praise to Caesar Augustus. I don't have many photographs of the hill country. We had to move through it fairly fast. It was a very unsafe area in some ways, but we did get to spend some time there. A wadi is a deep, deep, deep valley. A wadi is a hilltop tomb. And today, even still, Arab chiefs and so forth often are buried in enclosures like this with stones and now a piece of plastic over it. That's a gravesite of an Arab notable on the hilltop. Wadis all over in the hill country. We're coming north now to Megiddo on the Jezreel Plain. The mountains of the north taper off down to Gilboa, and the area where the story of Jesus and coming down from the Galilee, going toward Jerusalem, and came across the widow of the city of Nain. Do you remember that? And how her husband was already dead, and her only son has now died, and she's left destitute, and they're carrying his body out. And Jesus raises her son from the dead, and not just to go out and have a good time, but returns him to her to care for her. So this is the kind of the area where some of that happened. We're now at Tel Megiddo. I'm a couple of pages ahead of where I should be here. Oh, it's okay. Megiddo was an ancient city that was on the great plain of Jezreel. If we can look over here, up here, this is the mountains we've just come across are up here, but in this area through here, there's actually a break in the mountains and a pass that comes from here and goes over toward the seacoast and up toward Ptolemais, where there was actually a seaport. And it was an extraordinarily important crossroads for north-south trade routes and east-west trade routes. And whoever controlled that pass controlled the trade in that area. Well, the valley of Jezreel is beautifully fertile, and Tel Megiddo is a huge pile of dirt and ruins. The first to excavate there were English, and what they did, rather than being as careful as we were, for instance, Caesarea, they just went and dug a trench all the way across the Tel, and probably ruined about everything that they found, because they had no sense of layers, they had no sense of what they were looking for, they were just looking for, I don't know what they were looking for. But this is from the top of Tel Megiddo, looking across the Jezreel Valley. Beautiful area. The original entrance gate to Megiddo has been uncovered. Cities are founded where there is an area to strategically defend, where there is land to grow crops on, where there is adequate water, where there may be a religious shrine or not, or maybe one will come later or something like that. But there had to be a particular reason for locating the city. Well, in Megiddo was to protect this pass. And what happens is that the spring for Megiddo happened to be outside the city at the bottom of the Tel. The Tel is a big mount, the Tel Aviv, so forth. So what happened for Megiddo is if someone's going to come and take it, they just capture the spring, and the residents would have no water, they'd have to surrender. So in the Bronze Age, around maybe 1900 BCE, the people of Megiddo dug a hole, a trench, down through the Tel, all the way to bedrock, and then tunneled all the way out to the spring outside the Tel. They blocked off and camouflaged the spring and carved the tunnel so the water would run down into this hole in the middle of the city. And it's been opened here and going to 119 steps down. And underneath, you can't really see it, I'm afraid, is the tunnel that goes across. And they would just drop down buckets and bring up water. They had water in plenty and could withstand any kind of siege. This is just a sense of some of the pottery. It doesn't show up well in a museum at Tel Megiddo that they found in the Tel and reconstructed. But looking out from Megiddo, you can see armies coming in any direction, and huge battles have been fought there in every era, including World War I. There was a decisive battle by the British against the Turks in this area around Megiddo. And in the distance are two mountains that figure prominently in Christian history. These are called the Horns of Hattin, and it's where Solomon, who was from Egypt originally, but decisively defeated the Christian crusaders. Decisively defeated them. The story has said that the crusaders came with their armor and everything on their horses and blah, 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 and so forth, and they didn't bring any water with them. And Solomon had all sorts of water from Lower Galilee, from the Sea of Galilee and so forth, brought to his people. And they also figured that the crusaders were going to win because on their horses they were invincible, but they realized the horses were not invincible. So they killed the horses. And once the crusader with all his armor was on the ground, he was useless to fight. So the story there. Anyway, so many battles were fought there that it got to have a name. Har in Aramaic is a height. Megiddo was the place. So Har Megiddo is now Armageddon. From the scriptures, only referred to once in the book of Revelation, but has entered into Christian kind of imagery as the place where the final battle against good and evil is going to happen. Yeah. Next week, we're going to go up into the hill country to Nazareth and Upper Galilee, and we're going down to the Sea of Galilee in Lower Galilee, and we're going to go further north and east. So we're going to do that next week. So I don't know how we're doing on time. I'll be happy, for questions, thoughts, discussion, whatever. Peter? Don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Liz? Okay, on the map? It's right around through here.
Oh, okay, where the green line.
Yeah, it's where the two kingdoms come together. Right, the green line and the orange line. It's in that general area. I completely forgot to mention the Samaritans up in the hill country. Nobody knows quite where they came from. They might have been part of the Babylonian practice of moving populations around. The Babylonians took the Israelite leaders out to Babylon. The Babylonian captivity of the church is called, of the people. And moved others in. They might have been moved in during that kind of relocation. They have the same scripture as, mostly the same scripture as do Jews, but they worship not in Jerusalem, but on Mount Gerizim. And remember Jesus coming down through the Samaritan mountains and getting at the well by Sychar, and the woman was there, and they got into this tussle. It's one of my favorite stories. And she met him match for match, and she said, well, he said, your people say we have to worship in Jerusalem. Our people say we have to worship on Mount Gerizim, which is true. Which is the right one? And he said, well, the time's coming where you not worship in Jerusalem or on Mount Zion or Mount Gerizim, but worshiping God in spirit and truth. Good. Anyway, there's still Samaritans in the hills today. They still worship on Mount Gerizim. They're fascinating people. The Jews hated them. At one point, that one of the Pharisees says to Jesus, "You're a Samaritan." That was the worst curse you could give someone. And that's why the Good Samaritan so sticks out. Jesus was just sticking it to the Pharisees with that story, just sticking it to them. But today they're there, and one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating, we drove up into Samaria, didn't take any pictures there, but Samaritans have a gene that's passed along of red hair. And a number of Samaritans have bright red hair. It's just so strange to see that color, in the Middle East, where so many of the Arabs have such dark hair. Anyway, Frank? Yeah, I think Jesus and the disciples, walked. Yeah, they walked. Because a lot of their back and forth was in the walking. Remember, they're walking along, and the disciples were saying, Jesus said, what are you arguing about with each other as you're walking along? Who's going to be the greatest? Hey, I'm better than you are, blah, 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 blah. Or John and whoever came over and said, make us the greatest in the kingdom and so forth. But they walked a lot of places. That's where Jesus met Bartimaeus on the outside of Jericho. And I picture that because that area is so desolate, it's so hot, it's so dry, and they're facing that 15-mile walk uphill, 4,000 feet to Jerusalem. And here's Bartimaeus begging, and the entourage is saying, leave him alone. You know, we got to get on with this walk and so forth. And Jesus knows it. Stop. And what do you want? That I could see. You know, my sense is that they walked everywhere. I picture Jesus as extremely fit, extremely robust, yeah. Now. Yeah, still is. There still is, and sometimes people, when they're really walking long distances, didn't wear sandals, but they went barefoot, apparently. Yeah. So, yeah. Romans had sandals, at least up and around and so forth, you know, quite high and so forth. But I don't know. I bought a pair of Israeli sandals and they wrecked my feet. But yeah. Yes, Kitty? I'm sorry? Megiddo. Megiddo. Terrible conflict right now. Kind of moving to the modern day, the Israelis have built a national irrigation system, some with open canals, believe it or not, to the sun, and draining water from the Sea of Galilee and from the Jordan River to irrigate areas in the desert, even along the Shephelah, that plain near the coast that need water there. The Jordanians are doing the same thing from their side for irrigation. And so the two countries are trying to reach some kind of agreement. But the Sea of Galilee is so low that what emerged about 15 years ago was the outline of a ship that had sunk. And it's been excavated and out of the mud of the drying up lake. And it's a fishing boat from the 1st century. And it's been preserved. It is on display now at a kibbutz down on Galilee. And when I was there, they had it in a very, very dark room, and you could look through a little slit, and there was a little like 2-watt light bulb or something that would light up when you pushed a button, and you could kind of see a little, because light's going to destroy the wood. So they're working to preserve it, but they actually found a fishing vessel. Yeah. Thank you. Great.